Okay, so thank you, Mr. Kannan, for introducing me. It's a nice introduction to start with, and some of it is true. I keep saying that, so I'm always worried when people introduce me because I'm never sure which way it's going. But yeah, some of it, as I said, is true. So my name is Anirban, and I represent two organizations here today. One is called the Painted Sky, which is into leadership consulting, and the other is UBQT. UBQT is a design thinking school. It's India's only school for design thinking where we apply the same principles of design thinking, which I think you guys have been experiencing over the last few days. And that's what we do in our school. So without further ado, let me get started. The way I've designed today's interaction, because you're coming in with some overview of design thinking, uh, the way I've designed today's session is more about continuing on that conversation. I intend to speak for not more than 45 minutes. And then I want to open this up for a Q&A. And I would love to spend the last 15 to 20 minutes listening to you, hearing your questions, etc. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. So let me start by asking you, so how has your design thinking learning experience been so far? I believe, yes, you've spent about 6 hours learning design thinking. Is this the first time you have experienced design thinking? For most of you?
So this is Anand. I will just share my experience with you. This is not the first time that I've gone through design thinking, but this has further given us on vision, and it has structured our thoughts further.
Very good. Very good. Okay, lovely. So anyone else? Any other thoughts anyone else wants to share? Thank you, Anand, for sharing that. Yes, so I've been now involved with design thinking for over 10 years. We started doing design thinking in India back in 2010, long before it was cool and everybody was, I don't know if everybody was doing it, but at least talking about it. And we've been working now extensively with clients, corporate clients primarily, from an Accenture to a Xerox you can think of alphabetically. We work with Delhi government, we work with World Bank, we work with startups, large companies, educational institutions, all kinds of people. So today, when I intend to give you essentially a glimpse of the work that we do and how this, I hope, will link back to what you have experienced over the last couple of days to kind of help you understand the context of design thinking and also the potential of design thinking. I think design thinking can very easily be mistaken as just a process of problem solving. It gets reduced by all kinds of consultants and practitioners to say, these are 5 or 6 steps you need to move from point A to point B. Whereas for those of us who love it, those of us who have invested a decade in it, it's a philosophy that helps us transform the way we look at the world and therefore build solutions that make a difference to that world. So let me continue this conversation by kind of giving you a little context, what we are doing and why we're doing it. Today, we are living in a world where pretty much all that we have done in the past is fast becoming obsolete. And it was becoming obsolete even before COVID happened, with the way disruptions of technology, disruptions of people and culture and politics was happening. And what has happened with that is that it has impacted the way our customers have started to respond to us. I'm going to share with you some data. Take a look and then we'll continue. Right, so this is all data that you can find. This is all data that's available in the public domain. And what has organizations, especially large organizations, done to respond to this? The magic word pretty much across companies that I work with is let's go digital. Let's digitize our experiences. That by itself is also having a very interesting experience. Take a look at this number. $4.7 trillion is being used by organizations for digital transformation. And curiously, that's the rub. Less than 20% of it seems to be having any positive impact on customer experience. You link it back to the fact that customer loyalty is a problem today, and you start thinking that where is that balance 80% going? And it's not just in the product space. We find it across when we are building organizations. I work with large firms, and this is a huge challenge. People today in workforces are not engaged. People today are finding it more and more difficult to stay motivated in a fragmented world with gig economies coming in, etc. And again, remember, this is before COVID. And now what does it all mean? It is not that all of this is only the affliction of large firms. Let me share with you some data that might be of interest to you. I am pausing here because this is very, very relevant to the place you find yourselves in. Now, this is relevant simply because it's important for us to understand that in a fragmented marketplace, in a world of competition, in a world where people have choices, how well we know our customers is the critical driver for our success. And if you look at that data point that most people came to their ideas based on their personal experiences and not based on any research, and then you link it to the rate of failure of startups today, you probably start seeing a correlation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, my task is not to give you bad news when I start. That's not the point at all. But it's important for us to set the context, and I'm happy that you have started your design thinking journey with your learnings this morning, etc. But it's very important for you to understand that the more you learn about your user, the better you get in terms of building the solutions that matter. I work with product companies, I work with service companies. My team, we are helping everyone from an Adobe through a Flipkart to a Walmart to a Oracle to a Honeywell build better products, build better services. And pretty much in each of these cases, the conversation is coming down to the fact, how well have we done our research and how well have we understood our customer? And I'm sure that that's what you have kind of learned in your design thinking sessions, the need to empathize, the need to discover your customer needs, etc. So I'm not going to go into that. But just to remind you that all that I showed you was before this happened, and which pretty much upended everything in our world. I've been in this industry for 26 years now. And right from my management school days in IIM till now, I know of no management theory or business book that actually ever predicted the kind of world we'll find ourselves in. So it's very important for us to reinvent ourselves, because to me, this is the biggest risk that we face today, whether we are entrepreneurs or we are employees in organizations. We are constantly being asked, what's the question we're asking? And so that brings me into essentially the topic of what I want to talk to you about. What is meaningful innovation today? Because today, innovation is the driver for all success everywhere. Now, if you are interested in design thinking, if you're interested in Tim Brown's work, I don't know if you came across that in your course that you did. Essentially, we say good innovation is where these three circles converge. You have technological feasibility, you have business or financial viability, and you have user experience, desirability of and from the people who are going to probably consume your products and services. That's the key here. So if that's what you are starting your conversation with these three circles, let us take a step back and start by asking, what do we think of when we think of design? Now, I don't want to get into a theoretical conversation around design. Design is defined differently by different people. I always start with Jared Spool's famous lines. It's one of the most simplest and the most elegant ways of calling out design. Design is rendering of intent. What your customer user is intending to achieve, design allows him to do that. So does technology. Whatever is the intention of his life, the job he wants to do, is your product or service helping him do that? That's design. With that simple definition, of design. And I'm certain that in the last 2 days of your learning design thinking, the conversation must have been on design. I am not a designer by education. I'm a marketing management graduate by education, spent much of my life in marketing and strategy. But it's very important for us to start our conversation with understanding of design and now understand what can design do, which is what I want to talk to you about. That while we know what design is, we have to understand what design can do. And I want you to pause for a second on that line here. That without design, or rather through design, we try to build better cultures and better futures for ourselves. Think of it. I want each of you to pause for a second and think of it. Look around you, wherever you're sitting. Every element that you see around you, which is man-made or human-made, has been designed to serve a purpose. Your laptop, your mobile phone, your table, chair, room, everything is designed. And that design enables you to have a certain experience. Right now, it's enabling you to experience me. Now, if that design isn't right, of course, it's a no-brainer that the experience can't be good. And today, again, if I bring it back to the kind of world you're trying to create through your products and services, it's critically important that you understand that the kind of future you design defines not just the product use that you're trying to drive, but the lives of people that you're trying to help. Because what is that world we are designing? This is the world we have designed. These are our realities. Every day, these are the design realities we are experiencing. From an environmental context to inclusion of people context, to, of course, the impact designed products are having on the lives of people, lives of our children. All of it is designed. I would urge you to listen to the works of Mike Monteiro, one of the greatest living designers, one of my favorites out there, the founder of Mule Design. When he talks about our need to be conscious and responsible towards the world we build. And you are all builders, ladies and gentlemen. As entrepreneurs, you're trying to build not just products and services, but you are going to be a part of a system that will impact the lives of people, the world that we live in. And that's where I want to bring our conversation down to. That how are you thinking today of building products and services? How are you thinking towards building better solutions? Now, the thing about approaching design thinking, and you are already startups, you're already building products. I think you've already built your products. You're ready to build your products now, get them to become better, take them to the market, etc. So I don't want to spend any time talking design thinking to you. I think you've already experienced that. You're already applying that to what you know, what you're building. Maybe you're going to fine tune what you have with your understanding of design thinking. I want to spend the next 30 minutes that I have with you talking of two distinct elements that I work in and I take to my clients across the world, across the 11 countries that we work in today. The first one is what we call, and what we have developed ourselves, it's called a 5E framework. It's a 5E journey of design thinking. The fundamental premise is that once you have understood what is design thinking, once you have learned the steps, the process, the principles, as well as the tools and the techniques, how do you apply design thinking to make better services, better products, etc., to service your customers better, is how or where the 5E network framework comes in. This is something we have worked on for the last many years. We launched this last year and we run this for our corporate clients extensively. What are those 5 E's? I split them up into two groups. The first is what we apply to discover current realities. When we engage with people, when we talk to them in the real world, in their real context, and also when we experience what they experience. And the last three, and that's the three I intend to talk to you about more, because you're already designing, you've already got your products and your companies out there. I want to talk to you more about designing solutions that matter. So the way I look at it, you've probably already done the first two. If you have learned a little bit of design thinking, you've learned about empathy research, you've learned about discovering customer needs, you've done, I'm sure, some degree of research, applied that through some tools, etc. That's fundamentally the first two that I talk about. How do you engage better with people? Now, why is that important? I'm sure you know that by now, is when we talk to people, when we watch people in their natural environments, we ask that key question, why do they do what they do? Why are they living their lives the way they are? What does it tell us? What is there? What is not there? What's missing? What's missing? Can that be a solution? Can my solution, my product, plug into that gap and build something that is of meaning for him and for my business? So the more you talk to people, the more you interview people, but not just interview. In my experience of so many hours of doing this, interviewing is probably the worst way in which you can collect data, because people rarely tell you what is truth. You have to observe them in natural environment. You have to immerse in their experiences. If they are walking in the rain trying to use a mobile phone which has your application in a pouring rain, you have to do it. Only then do you understand where a button should be or how the product features should be. Because that's where in the real world, your product and service will be used. And that's the other part, the second E for us, experiencing. Yes, we need to understand customer experience. But you can't understand customer experience, ladies and gentlemen, without experiencing it yourself. I can give you many examples when we have worked with hospitals, when we have worked with, e-commerce companies, when we have worked with media companies, when we have worked with tech giants, where we have ensured that the developer, the engineer, the builder of a product or a service is pushed to live the life of the customer, live the life of the user. It's only when he realizes what that person really goes through in the real world can he use that knowledge to build products and services that actually will work. Please understand, the world is full of products and services. Most of them don't work. Most of them are getting rejected by customers because there's always something better available. To build a sustainable product or a service, you have to understand where your solution is going to impact the user's real experience. How will it transform his experience? And to do that, you have to really, really understand him or her. I'm certain that your course in design thinking covered the need for empathy. This is all that is there. The more empathetic you can become, the more useful your product and service will be as a result of that. So once that is done, I want to now spend some time talking about this. To me, this is the key message or the key element of today's talk. When I talk about the other three. Now, you are all building products, you're being incubated, you will soon enough hit the market. Have you considered beyond becoming a unicorn, maybe someday, beyond making profits, beyond making your VCs a ton of money, what will be the legacy of your product? What will your product be remembered for? What will it do, or what will it leave behind for the planet, for people on that planet? And I start I hope you've watched this documentary. It's on Netflix. Have you watched The Social Dilemma? I would like you to watch it. I would urge you to watch it. It's about how social media and big technology is impacting our lives. And I love this quote from that movie. That the moment we start looking at our customers as users of our products, are we missing the perspective that we need to have? That they are people like us. They are our children, maybe. They are our parents. They are our uncles. They are our neighbors, our friends. And what we are building is going to have an impact on their lives. So how do we build better products and services? Or if you're already building products and services, how do you make them better in terms of the way they impact the lives of people positively? So to do that, here are my 3 E's that I want to spend a little time with. The first I call is empowerment. Now, what is empowerment? And empowerment is nothing but, in the way I call it, and I don't want to go by any dictionary definition, empowerment is allowing people to live better lives. Who are the people? The people are those who we are designing for. Again, in your design thinking class, I don't know if you came across the works of Donald Norman. If you haven't, I would urge you to. Design of Everyday Things is pretty much, for me, the Bible, the book that I go to when I have to be inspired. It's called Design of Everyday Things. It's a beautiful book on design. But what Don says is very, very, very important when you build products. And here's why. Too often, I see companies and their products fail because they are trying to design for a user who doesn't exist. The ideal customer. The customer who already either knows or is able to or can figure things out, etc. But the customer might be a 75-year-old grandfather with cataract on his eyes. The customer can be somebody, a dyslexic 16-year-old who has problems studying. A customer can be somebody who we leave out of our design because we are designing for what we believe is the right customer, the ideal customer. Now, what does that mean for us? Who is the people we should be designing for? Is it him? Is it her? Do we have a responsibility when we design to consider their needs also? Or what kind of a world, what kind of products are these that regularly exclude people? Now, what does this graph show you? Can anyone tell me what is the meaning of this graph, this visual? Anyone, any guesses?
So this is a curve. Hi, this is Anand. So this is a curve which shows that if you talk about the extreme ends of the curve, you come across single entities, but when it reaches its maximum point, you see the maximum number of people when it comes to maximum point as achieved on the y-axis.
Super point, Anand. Thank you so much. Yes.
Yeah.
Now, let me expand on this for you. Too often, again, when we see companies building products, we tend to look, this is like a bell curve, right? And too often when companies build products, they look at the bell where you see the majority, what we call the mainstream user. We believe that if we can build a product that covers the majority of potential users, it's like the 80-20 Pareto's principle. That's all we need to care about. But isn't that by definition leaving people out? Now the question you should ask is, what is good design? And in my opinion, in my experience, when you design for extreme users, you end up creating products and services which are more inclusive. And the mainstream never has a problem. Think of it. All of you have been in offices or shopping malls or wherever, and you have seen a wheelchair ramp. Now, most of us who have no mobility issues have no problems with it. You and I can access the building either walking up the ramp or taking the stairs. But by building that ramp, by including that ramp, we just made that building accessible to people who would otherwise struggle to get into that house or office or mall, shopping mall. So what happened here is that you did not disrupt your mainstream, but you considered your extreme. So very recently, last year actually, I was working with a large MNC client, and somebody said, actually not last year, earlier this year. And one of my participants in my class said, but Anirban, how do you do this? In the sense, do I build, the conversation was about this recently. You must have read about this online computer course company that has been acquired by another one, and for some $300 million, and it's becoming very successful, etc. So we were talking about that example, and they said, and he was also a startup founder. He says, am I supposed to, you're talking about, let's say, children with learning impairment, dyslexic children, let's say. Am I supposed to build an app for dyslexic children? Then what happens? Because my app therefore becomes very limited in its scope. I said, no, that's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about the fact that you build an app, but also consider the needs of the dyslexic children. And if you can somehow make the app so that the dyslexic child can also use it, as well as the mainstream child who has no problem, does your application become more universal, more inclusive? And that's what I'm talking about. So it's not about building a technology or a product only for the extremes, but considering the extremes when you build it for the mainstream. I'll give you a couple of examples. You know what this is, right? To me, this is one of the world's first examples of inclusive design. This is a bicycle from the Victorian days. And by virtue of considering the fact that ladies wore skirts and designing that cycle based on that design, that consideration, you ended up making a bicycle that a man also has no problem using, but it allows women to use it. So when you understand your user, can you think from that perspective? Can you think about possible extreme users, and is your design enabling them to do that? Now, this is one of my favorite examples. It's the Coke Freestyle machine. It's a dispensing machine, but it's also, what I am told, the world's first machine which is wheelchair friendly. Somebody on a wheelchair can access the buttons easily. You and I have no problems, but it just becomes more empowering. Now, the world is full of examples. Now, this is from our experience working in education, in government school education, where when we start thinking about children with special needs or children who are on the extremes of social conditioning, socioeconomic conditions, and you start building for them, you realize that the mainstream rarely has a problem. We have worked with a bunch of NGOs in that, Udaipur Learning Foundation being one. We continue to work with Global Alliance for Mass Entrepreneurship. This is about developing entrepreneurship at the grassroots level, applying design thinking principles to build services and products that are inclusive. So the first of my 3 E's, ladies and gentlemen, is for me to ask you to think, can you think of empowering more people to enjoy the benefits of the products or services you're building, rather than a very narrow application base? What's the second E? Now, today you cannot design, in my opinion, anything without considering ethics. What are the ethical ramifications of what you're building? And by ethics, I can also loosely bring in the legal side of it. But to me, it's more about the use of data, the use of information. I love this quote. When a company like Facebook improves the experience of its products, it's like the massages you're giving to beef. It doesn't benefit the beef. So it's very important for us to think, the moment we talk ethics, the first name that comes to my mind is probably Facebook. I would ask you to follow the works of people like Tristan Harris, who runs an agency called Humane Design or something like that. Tristan Harris, check him out. He has beautiful TED Talks. He's in this movie called Social Dilemma. Watch the other documentary called The Great Hack, where misuse of data led to American elections being compromised. It's important for you to understand what are your ethical moorings when you're building products and services. What is the responsibility you're taking, and where is that ethics working when you're designing? Because what are we building? How are we thinking of solutions which are not helping people, which are toxic, which are damaging lives? Where are our morals here? How can we create a world? Again, think of this world as a designed world. That those who designed, what were their ethics when they thought of distribution, when they thought of data use, when they thought of wealth creation? What were they thinking? You're young, you're building startups, and I'm certain all of you will be successful. But it's very, very important for you to have your ethical moorings in place, ladies and gentlemen. Because it's very easy to lose our way in this world. And typically, we find those successes short-lived. The world has great examples. I would urge you to study the case of Warby Parker, a company that builds spectacles. And they have this brilliant idea that for every spectacle pair that you buy, they give a free pair to poor people in developing countries who can't afford spectacles of their own. That's the charity that they do, but that's their ethical boundary that they follow, the ethical model that they follow. In the social media space, there is Mastodon, which I sometimes really follow. There's Friendica that I follow, where they're very, very, very particular about the way they're using your data. What information of yours is stored? How is that data being used? Now, these are examples I'm giving you. They are not necessarily what you need to follow or focus on. However, when you build your products and services, ask yourselves, what are the ethical boundaries that are in my business, in this industry that I'm operating in, and how am I playing with them? That brings me to the third and the final E, something that we can't live without today. All of us, ladies and gentlemen, are living through this. It's not even our grandchildren. It could be our children. That's the reality we are living in. Where is your design going to be when it comes to your environmental impact, your carbon footprint? How are you going to leave the world? Better than how you found it, came into it, or worse? That, to me, is the greatest consideration we must have today. What is your footprint? How are you impacting? Remember, air travel is carbon footprint. Data centers is carbon footprint. Global warming. We are in a position, ladies and gentlemen, we can't ignore it. We can't park it for later. And that's what design is demanding us to do. When you are designing products and services, when you are designing solutions, it is asking us repeatedly, think about your footprint. Think about the impact you're making. I wanted to leave you with the thought on this. In 2017, there were people who died. I live in Bangalore, in the floods in the city. And it was caused largely by discarded packaging material that clogged the drains during the storm. The conversation should be about holding those companies accountable that make those packaging materials. And of course, us who consume so much. It's an important point for you to think. What you are building, what you are buying, how is it going to land up in the landfill? Do you know that a plastic bottle takes anything between 500 to 700 years to biodegrade? And most of things that we consider recyclable are not recyclable. Think of the packaging of your product that you're going to build. What should you consider? Your child, your grandchild's life and future is dependent on this. We are not in a position anymore to take it lightly. So there are examples again. I can give you many. Brewdog is a beer company, which is the world's first company of its time, which is carbon negative, which means it absorbs more carbon dioxide than it lets out in the environment. It's a brilliant case study. I would really urge you to read it. In the fashion business, one of our design, what can I say, heroes is a company called Patagonia. Please read up about them. Extremely profitable fashion brand, which focuses on recycling of apparel. I don't know if you know this, but the fashion industry is the world's second most polluting industry after oil and gas. All that plastic and the dye and the zipper, none of that is recyclable. And data shows that if we can extend the life of one garment by even 6 months, we reduce its carbon footprint by up to 50%. Why am I saying this to you? Because your products are not yet in the market, or maybe not in its fullest form. It's a great time for you to sit back and think, what will the carbon footprint of my product be 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years down the line? And can I live with that? Considering it's the air my child breathes or my grandchild will breathe. There is a collective called Urge. I would again ask you to read up about them, which is an advocacy group which also gives consulting on how to build environmentally friendly solutions. You can take a look at them. It really is very useful in terms of its resources. So I'm going to wrap up this section by just reminding you, therefore, that what you're building, yes, all of us who get into startup mode want to make $1 billion. We want to be the next unicorn. We want to make ourselves a lot of money, our VCs a lot of money. All of that's fine. At the end of the day, we are living in very exponential but very disturbing times. And it's for us to take more responsibility towards what we are building and the impact of what we are building on the world we live in. And I would urge you to think from that perspective. And design thinking is a critically important factor, a methodology that can do that for you. Think about the 5 or 6 steps of design thinking that you learned, that if you keep checking your ideas and your inputs, right from when you're doing empathy research and you think of empowerment, think of extreme users, think of asking them, how are they living their lives? How are they experiencing products and services? I work with pharma companies that are suddenly discovering that their patients can be colorblind and a colored pill doesn't work. I'm working with application design, online tourism companies that are discovering that when people are trying to use their tools in poor network areas, in rural areas, how their tool doesn't work. I am working with product companies which are trying to build solutions, but are not understanding that the user could be a 65-year-old woman in Massachusetts or a 42-year-old mother of 2 in a village in rural Uttar Pradesh. And their ability to understand technology could be very different from who we think we are building for. So the more we understand an empowerment through design thinking, we can build better products. And then when we have products, for instance, you probably have already products or product ideas in place, it's very important for you to think ethics. You don't want to be the Mark Zuckerberg or the Travis Kalanick. Gone are the days when they were poster boys. Today, the world, your customer, is becoming environmentally conscious. Do you know that across UK, young customers are not banking with large banks because they are also investors in fossil fuel companies? Across the world, people are moving to organic food, and you know that, or clothing, which have organic dyes in them, or applications, technology, where there is a strong statement of how the servers are impacting global warming. My whole point is when you start thinking about these things through design thinking, you end up building lasting products and services. Products and services that have impact on humanity. So how do you do that now? This is the last bit that I want to talk to you about before I open this up for a Q&A. I don't know the way you're going to look at design thinking. My fear always with people is that we end up looking at design thinking in a very limited way. And it's not the fault of the learner, but it's often the fault of the teacher, because we end up looking at design thinking only as a bunch of steps to get from point A to point B. But in our work, we extensively work in this area, especially with entrepreneurs, that before you even enter design thinking, you need to develop the right attitudes and the mindsets that enable you to perform design thinking better. And why is that important? Because attitudes are everything. Your ability to have the right attitude, all that I talked about, the 5 E's or the 3 E's that I talked about, can only happen if you have the right attitude to make it happen. So what are those attitudes we are talking? I am going to share with you what I learned in my school, Hasso-Plattner Institute in Germany, where I became a certified design thinking coach, what we call the 6 attitudes that drive design thinking. And these are those 6 attitudes. And I'm going to take you through each of them. Let me quickly, in the interest of time, move on. The first one, and again, I'm sure with your design thinking knowledge, you understand this: empathy. Put the human being at the center of your design process, not your product, not your system, and not your revenue. You're building for people. The more you can put them there, the better your solutions become, and the more sustainable and profitable your solutions become. Because people like to buy things that address their needs. It's as simple as that. But to do that, the attitude you will need to develop, ladies and gentlemen, is don't be judgmental. If somebody is struggling to use your product today, don't call him technologically challenged or her backward. As a design thinker, I always push back on companies and my clients saying that if she is having a problem using your product, the problem isn't her, the problem is in your product. Why isn't your product simple enough, intuitive enough, easy enough to be used? So don't judge. Look at the world through the eyes of your user. Be human-centered. Embrace diverse collaboration. Now, this is critically important. Too often, we miss this, that today, innovation is all about collaboration, and not just collaboration, diverse collaboration. Think of it from this perspective that you are a group of technology guys, let's say, and you want to solve a problem for a 65-year-old housewife. Are you a 65-year-old housewife? If you are, great. But how do you really know her life? What would happen if she's a part of your development cycle? If she's a part of your input? She sits through your product design sessions. She gives ideas. She helps you prototype. Yes, we end up testing with them. But where design thinking succeeds is if we can have her as a part of our journey. The more we bring in diversity in our collaboration, the better we get diverse ideas. And they are the ones that help us build products and services that work for a diverse range of people. I have a very strong allergy for the word a group of like-minded people. If all of us have similar mindsets, what new ideas are expected? So my recommendation to you, next time you want to do a brainstorming session, bring in somebody who has a completely different background, a completely different discipline. Bring in your wife, bring in your neighbor, bring in a musician, and just listen into their ideas, their perspectives. You might be surprised. In 100% of the cases that I run design thinking, ladies and gentlemen, and we do thousands and thousands of hours of coaching, consulting, product work every year, we are surprised what diversity in collaboration can do. So open up, talk to more people, talk to diverse people. Again, to me, and again, I think you know this already, the power of design thinking is not in finding solutions. You already have solutions, or you have the intelligence, you have the technology, you have the tools. If you're a large company, you have the money. But do you know what is the problem? Do you understand the problem in the context of the person facing that problem in real time, in the real world? If I have to experience, I'll give you an example, a cab hailing experience, booking a typical, taxi ride sharing application at 7 p.m. at a busy junction in your city. That's my reality on a rainy night. And if I understand the person who's facing that problem and the context, the bigger picture, can I build better solutions? Today, we are all building solutions for people, but do we understand that the time the person has to run that tool is maybe a few seconds, maybe a few minutes, but the person lives for more than that. And if the person is in, let's say, a poor bandwidth area, or is living in a joint family with a lot of noise, or has a lot of responsibilities at work, and over and above that, you are asking her to do something. Those are all the problems you might have to consider before you design your solutions, because your solution might have to be simpler so that it can be done in maybe 2 minutes or less, or might be able to run in a poor network area, but should be usable by somebody with poor eyesight or poor hearing. When you start understanding the problem from that perspective, you realize it's not just about the product or that moment the product is used, but the larger context of the human being that you have to understand. So problem exploration is a critical attitude you need to develop. Again, the more you engage, the better you understand who people are and why those problems exist. The other three are critically important attitudes that we have to develop overall in our leadership. Again, we are living in the mother of all VUCA worlds, ladies and gentlemen. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. You know what is VUCA, right? And in this age, if we expect certainty, we expect that what has worked in the past, what we are certain about, will continue to work in the future. We will struggle. We will perish. Because forget a vision. Do you even know what your world will be next week? So successful design thinkers, successful innovators, successful entrepreneurs are the ones who can enjoy uncertainty and work on what is certain within that. Conversely, there are those who are so terrified of uncertainty that they either freeze, they're unable to react to the uncertainty, or they rely on what has worked in the past, their experience. Now, I have a lot of respect for experience. But we have to understand that experience may not be relevant today in this disrupted world, in this fast changing world. So it's critically important for us to have the attitude to embrace this, that we will have to learn to live with it and still work with what we have and build for a future, build forward for a future. Then comes learning through experimentation, which is nothing but constantly prototyping. Now, I want you to think for a minute. Look in your universe again. Every man-made, human-made product or service that you have, tell me one thing that you can say is in its final version, that it cannot be improved. That does not mean that it is a bad product you're using today. If you are using, let's say, an iPhone 11 and tomorrow an iPhone 12 comes in, it does not mean that all 11 iPhones are bad phones or failures. We consider them in design prototypes for the next version and for all future versions. We are constantly learning. So one of the things that I always ask entrepreneurs as well as product guys is to build something quickly, rapidly, and put it in front of your users and get feedback. Don't get defensive. Don't get protective about your prototype. When they're criticizing your prototype, it's not criticism of you. It's invaluable feedback about how you can improve. It's the same principle of Agile. Constantly learn by demonstration and learn and move forward. And finally, being open to possibilities. What does that mean? That means that the solution or the inspiration can come from anywhere. Keep your eyes open, ears open, and antennas alert. I am right now working with a biotech firm that is using its learnings from Google Maps to figure out how it can deliver better solutions to its last mile customers in villages. We have constantly seen how best practices from one industry is picked up and applied in others. So my suggestion, my submission to you is don't get restricted to what you know or what you have experienced. Read, learn, watch videos, and try to understand how other industries, successful businesses are doing their business, managing to get results. And try to see what if some of that could be applied in my business. What if I could bring in some of them and bring it to what I'm trying to do? Incrementally, could I build a better product, a better service? So that's what my suggestion to you, ladies and gentlemen, would be, that for you to develop those E's, as we call it, it's very important for you to start even before to ask yourselves, do you have these attitudes? If you look at this list, I want to tell you something. I want to remind you of something. None of these are technical skills. You don't need to know better coding. You don't need to know rocket science, neuroscience, none of that. These are behaviors. These are things that you can learn and apply daily through practice. And the more you do that, the better you get in design thinking, the better, therefore, you get in innovation, and therefore in the kind of products and services you build, keeping in mind empowerment, ethics, and environment. So I'm going to wrap up my talk right now by reminding you that at the end of it, all of this is working towards only one thing. Since this is still about design thinking, although I didn't talk design thinking much to you, is to remind you that you have experienced design thinking as a process, as a principle, as just learning. But I want you to remember that great design thinking is solving for bigger problems. And I love this statement by Richard Perez, that you might be ending up building a better kettle. I'm sure many of you are building kettles right now. But what if your customer has no source of heat? So the more you think of the bigger problem, the larger problem, the better your solution is, the more sustainable and profitable your solution gets to be. So I just want to leave you with my last thoughts, that at the end of the day, and you know this, you have experienced this, design thinking is all about empathy. The more you understand about people, the better you are as a leader, the better you are as an entrepreneur, an innovator. And empathy leads to better products and services at the end of the day. It makes you a better innovator. It's through empathy that you will discover what is not there or what is there that can be improved upon and build, therefore, better products and services. That's my final quote, my final slide, that at the end of the day, a reminder that what helps people is good for business. Thank you so much. I am open to questions if you have any. We have a few minutes. I'd be happy to address your questions. Anyone, questions for me?
Yeah, Anirban, Anant here.
Yes, Anand.
What is the difference between, let's say, a legacy and a footprint? I mean, your take on it.
It's a good question. What is the context of this question? Where are you
The
coming
context, yeah. So the context here is generally people talk about legacy with respect to products. And
Okay.
seldom you come across people talking about legacy with respect to services being rendered, because, I mean, this is my personal opinion. I mean, whatever business schooling I did, generally people tend to talk more about products and less about services.
Interesting.
And then they talk about the footprint being left by products. I'm equally interested in knowing about how about a footprint or a carbon footprint being left by, let's say, the services which would have been rendered,
Sure.
and so on. So, which is why, generically, I wanted to understand the difference between a footprint and a legacy.
Well, that's a great question, Anant. And I have no problems telling you that I don't really have a great answer for it, simply because there must be definitions for it that I'm not familiar with.
Okay.
But here are my 2 cents to it. And this is just my take on it. And I could be wrong, right? It doesn't matter. The way I see it is, first of all, I always think that everything has a footprint. Everything leaves an impact. And when you talk about footprint, what is a footprint? You think of Facebook, you think of Flipkart. Now, at one level, I don't know whether you call it a product. There are a lot of people who would call it a service that you're providing. Now, the footprint could be in the minds of people who are addicted to social media streams. The footprint could be in the way people's lives are being altered, their attentions are being grabbed, fake news is being perpetrated through news services. To me, a footprint is a measurable impact of what is happening. So to me, the footprint of certain Indian news channels is massive on India's, I would say, social fabric. And it's an important conversation we must have. So I would say the footprint is there. The legacy to me is slightly maybe longer term. And that's my take on it. It's what you will remember something by. Or a legacy product is again something that probably has been running for a long time. So that's my take on it. I'm not even sure if that's a correct way of putting it, but that's where I would leave that. Again, I'm not an expert in that definition.
Yeah, thank you so much for that answer, Anirban. I have one more question for you.
Of course.
Generally, I have seen that people talk about innovation. It's always good to be innovative, and nobody would disacknowledge the fact of not being innovative. So now my question here is, because see, from where am I coming from is, what happens when innovation becomes a tradition? I mean, ideally, I should have put this question to Mr. Nadella, because I saw that you used 2 different quotes of Mr. Nadella in your presentation. So maybe you're not the right person to whom I should put, but since you're using, so maybe you would have understood the psychology and the philosophy behind. What happens when innovation becomes a tradition? Should people stop respecting tradition? In turn, they would stop respecting innovation.
Okay. So I think you have to read that statement in the correct context. What Satya Nadella is talking about there is that by tradition and innovation, what he means is the traditional way of working is something that the world is leaving behind and moving forward. We are constantly, continuously innovating because our customers, our users are continuously demanding better products and services. Gone are the days of my father's time or your grandfather's time, maybe, where they would wear one watch all their lives or go to one bank and have one banking experience irrespective of how bad it is, because that was the traditional way we used to do business. Today's world is different. Today's world has everybody constantly innovating or trying to innovate to improve on what was once a tradition. If you think of the way things were being done as a tradition, you're constantly improving that by innovating on it. So
No,
that's
fair
one
enough.
part of it. So that's,
Yeah,
I would say that you're leaving a traditional way of problem solving to a developing an appetite for continuous innovation. So that's one part. The second part of it is what is very interesting question. What happens if innovation becomes your tradition? Oh, I love it. It's rare to do that, but if organizations can constantly question themselves, question the way they are going about solving problems, their products, and keep asking, why do we do it this way? How can we do this better? What if we could improve? The answers to such questions could be new innovative ideas or new ways in which you can solve problems. And therefore, just for your consumption, we work with a lot of organizations that invest in developing a culture of continuous innovation, where it's not just about building billion-dollar products or services, but it's also saving a few dollars or saving a few hours from processes and systems, improving efficiencies, improving productivity, improving morale, improving culture, all of these things by innovating right from physical spaces to products, to systems, to tools, to everything. The fact is, Anant, and this is a very important point for you to consider, is that what you would love to build, which organizations struggle to build, is a culture where people are constantly questioning status quo, constantly questioning what exists, and saying there must be a better way of doing that.
correct.
Think of it from this perspective. Uber did not invent the taxi service. It looked at what existed before Uber and created a product which essentially looked at improving the current experiences through cutting edge technology and innovation. Often enough, innovation is only that, our ability to see what is missing and building on that. And to do that, you have to build a tradition, or I would say a culture that is constantly asking questions. It's not that once in a month we get into an innovation huddle, or once in a quarter we think, okay, let's think, how can we innovate? Innovation is in everything we do. And that's the beauty of design thinking. Everywhere where you have human stakeholders, design thinking works for you to ask a question, how might we improve a certain experience? That's how it works finally, about continuously innovating.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anirban.
You're welcome, Anand. Good questions. Any other questions for me?
Yeah,
Yes,
hi.
Susham. Go
Yeah,
on.
hi. Okay, so about targeting the mass users, okay, and at the same time looking after the others who can be the part of your product and service. So we as a startups, okay, where the daily struggle is about so many things, about getting the users, about proving it to everyone actually, whosoever we are interacting to. So what I understand is, look at the broader picture. This has to come from the founders. I mean, we have to define it as a culture of the company that going forward also, this is the thing that is a part of the company's culture. But at the very initial stage, while we are running behind each and everything, I'm not very sure how do we manage this, because while being in the race, sooner or the later, it becomes a part of us that we are running that race. So I'm not very sure how to maintain that
So
cultural thing.
I heard two things from you. One was the second part where you talked about the culture element of it. And the first part of it was, I think, when you were referring to my talk on inclusive design and empowerment, right? There are two things to that.
Yes.
Let me address them in separate pieces. All right, chunk them down. Uh, you're right. I think there could be a perspective that you are, maybe there are 2 or 3 of you building a company, you're still in an incubator, for crying out loud. And maybe a conversation on building a concrete culture, this is too early. But it's important for you, Shubham, that what is the context of the culture I'm using here? I'm talking of a culture that looks at questioning status quo and therefore values innovation. Too often organizations fail, whether you think of a Motorola or a Nokia or an ambassador car, etc., which were leaders of one point in time but are now rarely found in the market. It's because while they had great technology of a certain era, they stopped innovating constantly in terms of understanding newer needs of customers, evolving or emerging needs of customers, and constantly addressing them through innovation. My point on culture is that it's something for you to keep inside you, that as you build your organization, as a leader of that organization, what kind of culture do you want the company to have? Do you want a culture of complacency? Do you want a culture that says, I have built this great product and this is the greatest that can ever be and I'm not going to innovate anymore? Or do you build a culture that encourages your engineers, your people, your designers to question what is there and constantly say, we can improve, we can get better, we can save more money, we can improve customer experience? I don't even have to answer that question. I'm sure you understand that. So it's not something that you need to think of right now. Maybe I don't know your business right now. But for me, it's a very critical element of an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur, so take it from me, that the culture that encourages disruption, the culture that encourages innovation, questioning,
Okay.
you, the boss, needs to be questioned as to why are you doing that? And the more you allow yourself to be questioned, your team becomes encouraged to question everything. The more they question everything, the better they get in finding answers that are of value. Okay, so I mean that when I talk of culture.
Okay.
Okay, your point on inclusion, empowerment. Is there a question there, or have I answered that already?
Yes, about the empowerment, then initially, right, means in the initial time of the business where we are trying to prove it to ourselves first that, okay, whether it is a product market fit or not. So I don't think, please correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that inclusion comes into play at that point in time for us, right? Because we are trying to target to mass audience at initial level.
Well, again, I am not familiar with exactly what is it that you're building, so I won't go into that right now. My perspective today is that I am segueing into your design thinking conversation, and I wanted to share with you some best practices. All right. Now, those best practices I have seen personally are practices that companies start practicing from day zero. Okay. Or they want to save it up for later, that when we scale, that's when we start to consider. But here's my 1 minute on it before we move on, is that you can choose whether you want to bring this in or not. I am only saying that great products today are great services today are the ones that are trying to be inclusive, because it is very easy to leave people outside. And inclusion means more customers. Inclusion means getting people who are unable to use your products, even if that is 1% more. That's 1% more customer. And also think of it, your competitor might not be thinking that. So that could actually be your competitive edge. And here's the thought, if you go back to the ladies cycle example or the wheelchair ramp example, the mainstream is not negatively impacted because you considered extremes.
Right.
But by considering extremes, if you thought that if somebody who has a problem reading a screen and I designed for him, maybe what I'll end up designing will make it easier for everyone to read a screen, including those who don't have a problem. So does that mean you ended up becoming a creator of a product which is easier to use? considering simplification, simplicity, and ease of use are key drivers of user experience today. Clearly, that's not a bad thing, right? So it's your call, but I would love to leave you there with the thought that it's a best practice to consider.
Okay. Thank you so much. Well understood.
Thank you. Do we have time or are we out of time?
I think we are out of time, Anirban. We are 10 minutes past 4. So Anirban from IIM Udaipur Incubation Center, I think it was an impactful session. I would tell you that. I think you covered all aspects of what to consider when you develop a product. I think it's beneficial to the team who's here. So thank you very much, Anirban. Thank you for your time, right? And then we'll share your profile with the team, and then we would request them to get in touch with you if they need to work with you on a one-on-one basis.
Of course. I mean, I'm best available on LinkedIn. So thank you so much for hosting me today, Kannan, and Suresh for getting me over. Thank you, guys. I had a great time. I hope to, I actually, first of all, wish you the very best. I know how it is to be at your stage of an entrepreneurship. So all the best. And I'm hoping that I wish you all the success. And I want to read your names on newspapers for all the right reasons. Remember my 3 E's, and remember that it's important for you to consider them when you build products and services. And I look forward to being in touch. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you very much.